Happy All Saints Day. Greetings to all of you saints. Sunday, November 1st is All Saints Day. You may not think of yourself as a saint, but Jesus makes you one. It's what Francis Schaeffer called the finished work of Christ on the cross. Makes you a saint, makes me a saint. So happy All Saints Day. This week, week number 3 in our series, Unlikely Heroes, we're going to look at somebody that probably didn't think of herself as a saint, probably didn't think of herself as a hero or as a leader. We're looking at Judge number 4, recorded in the book of Judges, Deborah. Her story is found in chapter 4 and chapter 5. Now, chapter 4 is more of a narrative history. A narrative history, whereas chapter 5 is a song, might call it a poem. They relate the very same story. The two chapters could easily be told in fairy tale form. Once upon a time, there was a wicked king who had a fierce general who had 900 chariots. Life was hard for the poor people who lived in the land under the thumb of the oppressor. But there were 3 people who came to the rescue: a woman who was a judge who sat under a tree, a soldier who won a battle in a thunderstorm, and a woman with a mallet and a tent peg. This is history, it's narrative, it's theology. Recently I was reading a novel titled Near Dark by Brad Thor, who writes political thrillers. And in this particular novel, he had the protagonist sitting in an ancient church in Europe. And this was one of the thoughts that came to him while he was looking at this beautiful architecture. And that is, if there's one thing religion understands, it's evil. Evil. It's all around us. And sometimes it looks like it's winning. But the thing the Bible teaches us about evil is that evil is always defeated eventually. Every time a Nazi imprisoned or killed someone, tortured someone, it looked like the Nazis won, but it was a short-term victory. Every dictator in history has been overthrown, and most have been killed by those they oppressed. In Judges, over and over, we encounter an oppressor, an evil king, an evil dictator. Personally, I think all dictators are evil, but I grew up in the United States, and we don't have a lot of respect for dictators. And so once again, Israel is occupied by an evil king for a period of 20 years. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. Remember those phrases that we're seeing over and over. Now that Ehud was dead, so that the Lord sold them into the hands of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. Sisera was the commander of his army, and because he had 900 chariots fitted with iron and he cruelly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years. And finally they cried out to the Lord for help. The opening verses of chapter 4, which I just read, describe the historical background. The cycle of apostasy and judgment is repeated yet again. That matter-of-fact account is then enlivened by the vivid picture or portrait of life in Israel that's found in chapter 5, verse 5. In the days of Shamgar, son of Anath, in the days of Jael, the highways were abandoned. Travelers took the winding paths. They went out of their way to avoid the oppressors. Villagers in Israel would not fight. They held back until I, Deborah, arose. Until I arose, a mother in Israel. You see, no one took the major highways for fear of being robbed or killed. It was safer to use the winding detours or secret paths. Public life in Israel at this time was governed by fear. The whole community seemed paralyzed and helpless. The people were so demoralized, they did not even bother to make weapons. The situation looked utterly hopeless. And then Deborah. Deborah was a prophet, we're told in chapter 4. And she was leading Israel at that time. She held court under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethiel in the hill country of Ephraim. And the Israelites went up to her to have their disputes settled. Well, one day Deborah sent for Barak, son of Abinoam from Kadesh in Naphtali, and said to him, "The Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go and take with you 10,000 men and lead them up to Mount Tabor. I will lead Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his troops to the Kishon River and give him into your hands." But Barak said to her, "If you go with me, I will go. But if you don't go with me, I won't go." So Deborah the judge is giving Barak a command to go lead the army in battle. "Certainly I will go with you," said Deborah, "but because of the course you are taking, the honor will not be yours, for the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman." And so Deborah went with Barak to Kadesh. There Barak summoned Zebulun and Naphtali with 10,000 men up under his command. Deborah also went with him, and all the troops of Sisera fell by the sword. Not a man was left. The end of chapter 4. On that day, God subdued Jabin, the Canaanite king, and the hand of the Israelites got stronger and stronger against Jabin. Then the land had peace for 40 years. One of the lessons of Judges, of course, is that when God is marginalized in our lives, decline and disintegration follow. God needs to continually be in our thoughts and in our affections. And I hope that you will focus on that. That back in the old days, back when I was in my 20s and 30s, we talked a lot about having morning devotions. And one of the reasons we did that was because we were taught that if you start your day with your thoughts on God, that was going to be an important thing for your whole day. Now, I'm not so strict that I think it always has to be done in the mornings, but having some kind of regular time that you set aside to make God the focus of your thoughts is one of those things that ensures that you're staying on track yourself. And in Judges, what we see over and over is the nation getting off track. And so you want to learn a lesson from them, from their history. Stay on track. Keep your thoughts, keep your affections on God. Now, one of the lessons of this section of Judges is that, yes, God uses women in significant roles of leadership and authority. Now, there are people who don't believe that. I do believe that because I see it right here, and I see it in daily life. Just in the Old Testament, Deborah's not the only one who is called a prophet. Other women who are called prophets, Moses' sister Miriam, Huldah, whose story is in 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles, Noadish, whose story is told in Nebuchadnezzar, or in Nehemiah, sorry. Wrong Old Testament name. And then in Isaiah, there's a woman who's just called the prophetess. In the New Testament, there's Anna, who's called a prophet, Philip's daughters, who are called prophets. Deborah is unique in that she's the first woman who exercised civil authority in Israel. And it is true, as I said, that some people don't believe women should ever be in any kind of leadership roles. I say, let God be God. Let God use whomever he wants to use. Don't put God in a box that says, oh, God can use one person, but not another. That you have to be a certain gender to be used by God in significant positions of leadership or authority. When my daughter was in 5th grade, I was on staff at a church that had an annual musical that the children performed. And so that particular year, my daughter decided to audition for one of the main roles in the musical. It was the role of pastor. The people, the staff and volunteers who were leading the musical came to me when they heard that she wanted to audition for the role of pastor and asked me what I thought about that. And I said, well, I think that's great. It's a good role, isn't it? It became very clear that they were uncomfortable with the idea of not just my daughter auditioning for that role, but any girl auditioning for that role. Because in their minds, they saw pastor, they saw a man. I reminded them that that particular congregation was part of a denomination that ordained women as pastors. And they said, yeah, they knew that, they understood that, but this was the position of senior pastor. And I said, it doesn't matter. In that denomination, women are ordained as pastors. That taught me something. Now, my daughter didn't get that particular role. She did get a pretty plum role and sang a solo in that musical. But it showed me that for those folks, even though theoretically they were part of a church that was part of a denomination that did ordain women, they still saw limitations on the role of women. There's no limitation on Deborah. Deborah was a judge, and then she helped command the army. She was willing to give that role over to a man. She was a judge, she was a prophet, and then she helped lead in battle. That was Deborah. Learn from these stories. Make sure that you're not keeping God in a very narrow little box. If God chooses to use Deborah, God might be choosing to use you as a woman. Let's not put God in a box as to who can be used in a significant way. Who are the beloved? Go and be the beloved.